So, why did the Battle of Saipan happen? Due to the piercing battles of the Pacific during the World War II, June 15, 1944, Marines from the United States stormed the beaches of the strategically important Japanese island of Saipan. So, with the intention of capturing a critical airbase from which the United States could launch its new long-range B-29 bombers directly at the Japan's home islands. So, faced with fierce Japanese resistance, Americans poured their what you call this? Poured their landing craft to establish a beachhead at the battle Japanese soldiers inland and forced the Japanese army to retreat to north. So next question is, who fought at the Battle of Saipan? So who fought at the Battle of Saipan is mostly generals from the U.S. Marines and also the Japanese and its generals.
Hello, I am Raymond Bacani from BSIT-1H. Why did the US invade Saipan? From the opening salvos of World War II in the Pacific, it was clear that the Mariana Islands, especially Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, were an important part of Japan's strategic landscape. The Japanese had administered the northern Mariana Islands of Saipan and Tinian in 1914, and captured Guam from the United States in the opening days of the war. In the intervening 3 decades, the Japanese built infrastructure and eventually developed significant military installation, especially on Saipan. That is why in June 1944, the United States launched Operation Forager, which began with the invasion of Saipan on June 15. The size of the American invasion force was unprecedented in the Pacific theater to that date. Fast Carrier Task Force 58 included 15 fleet aircraft carriers carrying nearly 1,000 combat aircraft, and the invasion force. The V Amphibious Corps comprised 3 combat divisions, the 2nd and 4th Marine Division and the 27th Infantry Division, reaching over 70,000 Marine soldiers and sailors. After a nearly month of mountainous jungle combat and hundreds of naval air sorties, American military leaders declared the island of Saipan secured on July 9, 1944. In summary, US invaded Saipan because it is a very important part of Japanese strategic landscape, and if they captured it, they will have a huge advantage in the war.
How many Japanese died in Saipan? On 9 to 12 July, hundreds of Japanese civilians committed suicide, many by leaping off the high cliffs on the northern end of the island. Some of those who hesitated were shot down by hold-up Japanese troops. The invasion of Saipan was horrific. When it ended, at least 23,000 Japanese troops were dead and more than 1,780 had been captured. 47, nearly 15,000 civilians languished in U.S. custody. Finally, 22,000 Japanese Okinawans, Koreans, and Chamorro civilians, as well as those of mixed ancestry, had fallen victim to murder, suicide, or the crossfire of battle. Japanese 23,000 killed, 5,000 suicides, and 1,780 prisoners, and 15,000 civilians dead, mostly suicide. The Battle of Saipan was a devastating defeat for the Japanese. More than 30,000 Japanese soldiers died, along with untold numbers of civilians, many of whom committed suicide by jumping off the cliff near Murphy Point. In front of 105th position on the Tanafag Plain were 2,295 dead Japanese. Another 2,016 bodies lay in the near of the 105th position for a total of 4,311 Japanese killed in attack on the.
Good day everyone, my name is Lawrence Zamora from BSIT-1H. How Spain gets in name. The largest island in the Northern Mariana Island, a U.S. Commonwealth in the Western Pacific Ocean, is the Guam. Spain's population was 47,565 565 people in 2017. According to U.S. Census Bureau of Commonwealth Department of Commerce estimates the Commonwealth government's legislative and executive branches are based in the island. Settle of Capitol Hill, while the judicial branch is based in the village of Suspen. Most media refer to Spain as Commonwealth's capital because the entire island is constituted as a single municipality. The next one is how many ships were involved in the invasion of Spain. On June 15, 1944, during World War II's Pacific Campaign 1939 to 45, U.S. Marines stormed the beaches of Spain, Saipan, strategical important Japanese island in order to capture control of a vital airbase from which the United States could launch its new long-range B-29 bombers directly at Japanese home island. In the Japanese face of intense Japanese resistance, Americans descended from their landing craft to establish a beach fight Japanese soldiers in island and forced the Japanese army to return north. When the Americans eventually concerned the Japanese in the northern half of the island, they launched a tremendous counteroffensive in the spring of 1944. U.S. soldiers fighting in the Pacific Campaign conquer Japanese control island in the Central Pacific Ocean in their way to Japan. The Marshall Island has been seized by armada of 535 U.S. ships with 127,000 troops, including 77,000 Marines, and the Mariana Island, which comprise the key front line for Japanese Empire defense, were next on the agenda.
Who win the Battle of Saipan? The loss of Saipan stunned the political establishment in Tokyo, the capital city of Japan. Political leaders came to understand the devastating power of the long-range U.S. bombers. Furthermore, many of Saipan's citizens were Japanese, and the loss of Saipan marked the first defeat in Japanese territory that had not been added during the aggressive expansion by invasion in 1941 and 1942. War still General Heikki Tojo, Japan's militaristic prime minister, had publicly promised that the United States would never take Saipan. He was forced to resign after a week after the U.S. conquest of the island. By early July, the forces of Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, the Japanese commander on Saipan, had retreated to the northern part of the islands, where they were trapped by American land, sea and air power. Saito had expected the Japanese Navy to help him drive the Americans from the island, but the Imperial fleet had suffered a devastating defeat in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 19 to 20, 1944, and never arrived at Saipan. Realizing he could no longer hold out against the American onslaughts, Saito apologized to Tokyo for failing to defend Saipan and committed ritual suicide. Before his death, however, Saito ordered his remaining troops to launch in an all-out surprise attack for the honor of the emperor. Early on the morning of July 6, an estimated 4,000 Japanese soldiers shouting banzai charged with grenades, bayonets, swords, and knives the encampment of soldiers and marine near Tanapag Harbor. In wave after wave, the Japanese overran parts of several U.S. battalions, engaging in hand-to-hand combat, killing or wounding more than 1,000 Americans before being repelled by howitzers and point-blank machine gun fire. It was the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War, and as was the nature of such an attack, most Japanese troops fought to their death. However, the suicidal maneuver failed to turn tide of the battle, and on July 9, U.S. forces raised the American flag in victory. However, Saipan, Vic, American flag in victory over Saipan.